I am Boris and this is Business Incorporated. It is Wednesday, the 2nd of October. Welcome to the show, everyone. On today's program, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission is proposing public consultation on data fee changes. Meantime, the Nigerian Stock Exchange reported a surplus of 2.7 billion naira in 2018, despite a challenging operating environment. And Côte d'Ivoire and Kenya has been named the rising stars of global trade on the African continent. Let's get the show started with the markets. As always, here on the African continent, most bourses were lower intraday Wednesday, with the Nigerian Stock Exchange NSE down 0.35%, while the GSE All-Share Index in South Africa fell much bigger. You can see that deep red, 1.33% for the biggest stock market in sub-Saharan Africa. In the north of Africa, Egypt's index, the EGX 30, was doing also a negative 0.5% intraday. Meantime, Kenya finished the first trading day of the month, which was yesterday, 0.30%, and that was the Kenya or the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Across with me to the Middle East and look at the markets which we are following today. Most of the GCC markets were lower intraday Wednesday. The Abu Dhabi index fell about 0.5%, while the stocks in Dubai also plunged about 1.25%, reading 2744.18 intraday. Flip that over and you're looking at the Qatar stock index down 0.72%, even as its Saudi counterpart, the Tadawul index, fell 0.86% also on the day. The Saudi index is now down to 7,983. Let's check in with the UK market, where the Prime Minister Boris Johnson is due to unveil his final Brexit offering to Brussels today, insisting that his plan is a reasonable compromise, quote unquote, and offers the European Union the last chance to avoid a chaotic no-deal exit at the end of this month. Juliana Olayinka is my colleague at our London studios, and she spent most of the day in town and in the office. Juliana, it's good to see you. You made sure you got into the studios today. It's a busy day there, crossing the political and market street for us. Thank you so much. Let's start this conversation on the political side. What is this update on Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister's alternative to Brexit plan, if there is what you call the devil's alternative? That's the title of that very famous novel by, I guess it's Jeffrey Asher, I can't remember. I'm not so sure, but it's just one of those. It's called The Devil's Alternative.
Yes. Okay. This morning. But look, you know, all eyes and ears have been fixated on Prime Minister Boris Johnson's keynote speech at the Tory party conference in Manchester. One of the main reasons is because, of course, this is D-Day in him and his team trying to get a deal together that the EU will finally accept. And one of the sticking points, of course, is that Irish backstop, the backstop that Theresa May tried to put through Parliament that was rejected 3 times, bearing in mind it was the only deal that was accepted by the EU, left some of the United Kingdom, being it Northern Ireland, still within the EU customs territory. Now, hardline Brexiteers said that's totally undemocratic, and because Northern Ireland, although it's across the water, is still part of the United Kingdom, just doesn't fit well and means that the UK haven't Brexited. Well, he has come up with some resolution. I'm just reading through some of the details now, and basically some of the items and the issues in the proposal would mean that Northern Ireland do indeed stay in some parts of the EU customs union. Now, we know that Northern Ireland, their parliament instalment has basically been out of office for over a year now. They're having lots of their own issues, but Boris Johnson and his team are saying that they're going to allow more devolution, so allow more powers, so Northern Ireland can can deal with the EU on their own without too much interference from Downing Street. We're not sure exactly how the DUP, the Northern Irish Party that are keeping Boris Johnson in government at the moment, would react. There were suggestions that this is exactly what Boris Johnson would want to do. Some say it's, throwing Northern Ireland under the bus, really. And they said that Boris Johnson wouldn't do that. So, of course, as the day progresses, we'll be seeing more reactions. We're not sure what the EU will think of this. Some sources are saying that it just hasn't gone far enough, that the EU are not happy. We'll get an official response later today when Boris Johnson speaks with the EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. But Boris Johnson was pretty adamant. Of course, as he usually is, his keynote speech was full of flamboyance and humorous statements that the British press are going to pick up and laugh about later, but still very thin on the details. So a deal is there. It's been sent to the EU. So now it's over to them and whether or not they're going to accept it.
Interesting. The Brexit train is yet to reach its final destination. That's pretty obvious. But one man has reached his final destination, as it were, with Tesco, and that's Dave Lewis, who is being replaced. The question is, who's replacing him at this supermarket, a retailer, very big retailer in the UK? Who's stepping into Dave Lewis' shoes, Juliana? Any idea?
Yeah, big story, actually. Tesco, still one of the leading supermarkets in the UK, but it's been pretty tough. They've had a tough ride over the past few years, especially since that horse meat scandal, which I'm sure you've been familiar with. But yes, he did announce today, Dave Lewis, that he'll be stepping down after just 5 years on the job. He's going to be replaced by a man called Keith Murphy. Now, Keith Murphy is what you call a lifer. He spent a long time at Boots. Boots is the health and pharmaceutical retail store in the UK that's doing pretty well, despite a lot of other high street stores struggling. He was the chief operations officer for Boots in the UK and Ireland. He'll be stepping in his shoes next year when Dave Lewis steps down. He's stepping into a £1.35 million basic salary, Bosun, which is a pretty handsome rate. But it is a tough competitive market. It'll be interesting to see just how he'll be able to shape Tesco, because of course clothing and food is exactly where a lot of these supermarkets are going to, particularly as we discussed last week about Poundland, and they're trying to get into the clothing market. So tough boots to fill, but Ken Murphy, former lifer at Boots, will be taking over Dave Lewis as the CEO of Tesco later next year.
Juliana, I'm looking at the markets numbers, in particular the stock market for the entire Europe, including the FTSE 100, and I feel like just covering my eyes because the numbers are looking really, really bad. The FTSE 100 is reading more than 2.25% in the water as we speak. What's biting the markets today? Any idea?
Not great at all, actually. I think these are the worst figures I've seen in the 6 months I've been talking to you. Some people are calling it fragile at best, pessimistic at worst. Really, it's the economic data that we've seen from across the world. The US, their manufacturing figures were out, and they're absolutely awful. We've also had some PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index figures out for September in the UK, and manufacturing still below that 50 benchmark, still a high possibility that the UK could head in a recession. We're also seeing not great figures in China. Lots of these protests that are happening in Hong Kong are manifesting itself into the markets. There's anxiety across the board and people don't like it. Let's quickly have a look at those numbers specifically. The FTSE All Share is down 1.80% at intraday. The FTSE 100 down 2.07%, and the FTSE 250 is down 1.21%. Currencies, Boris Johnson's speech did nothing to move the pound. Sterling is still down on the US dollar by 0.45%, also down on the euro by 0.39%, and down on the Japanese yen by 0.61%.
Juliana, thank you. Just as we're having this conversation, the US ADP report is just in. Thank you so much, Juliana, my colleague from our London studios. See you again tomorrow, Thursday, to continue the conversations from here and just bringing everyone to speed.